Most people don't control their emotions, they react. Something small happens, and suddenly their mood changes, their decisions change, and sometimes even their entire direction changes. A comment, a look, a situation, and they're already affected without even noticing it. Because their emotions are controlling them more than they control themselves. And over time that becomes a pattern: react first and think later. But there's a different type of person. Someone who feels everything but doesn't show it. Someone who notices everything but doesn't react. Someone who goes through pressure, stress, even frustration and still stays calm. And that's where people get confused. They think he's cold. They think he doesn't care. They think nothing affects him. But the truth is completely different, because the Sigma male doesn't lack emotions. He controls them, and that changes everything. Instead of reacting instantly, he pauses. Instead of letting anger take over, he observes. Instead of showing everything, he processes it. And that small difference creates a completely different level of power. Because when you control your emotions, you control your actions. And when you control your actions, you control your life. That's why he doesn't get pulled into drama. That's why he doesn't overreact. And that's why he doesn't lose himself in situations that don't matter. He chooses how to respond. And that's something most people never learn. But this level of control doesn't come naturally. It's built through discipline, awareness, and experience. It means feeling anger without acting on it, feeling pressure without breaking, and staying calm when everything around you is chaotic. Because controlling your emotions means facing them instead of escaping them, understanding them instead of ignoring them, and mastering them instead of being controlled by them. And most people avoid that, but the Sigma male doesn't. He turns emotions into information, not reactions. He uses them to understand situations, not to lose control inside them. And that's what makes him different. And if you learn this, everything changes. You stop reacting to everything. You stop giving your energy away. And you start moving with control instead of impulse. And that's when people start noticing you, not because you're loud, but because you're stable. If this kind of mindset speaks to you, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more content on psychology, mindset, and human behavior that most people never understand. Because once you learn how to control yourself, you become hard to control by anything else. And now think about this. Do you control your emotions, or do they control you? He pauses instead of reacting. Most people react instantly. Something happens, and before they even think, they respond, they speak, they act, and sometimes they regret it later, because it came from impulse, not awareness. But the Sigma male moves differently. He doesn't rush his reactions. He creates a small space between what happens and how he responds. And that space is where his control comes from, because instead of being driven by emotion in the moment, he steps back mentally, observes what's happening, and allows himself to think before acting. And that changes everything about how he handles situations. That pause may look small from the outside, but it's powerful. Because in that moment he is not controlled by anger, frustration, or pressure. He is choosing his response. And that gives him an advantage most people don't have. Because while others are reacting emotionally, he is responding intentionally. He doesn't say things he will regret. He doesn't act in ways that create unnecessary problems. And he doesn't let situations control him. Instead, he controls how he moves within them. And that creates stability in the way he handles life. Over time, this habit becomes automatic. He doesn't need to force himself to pause. It becomes part of how he thinks, part of how he processes situations, and that makes him calm even in moments where others lose control. Because he is not rushing to react, he is choosing when and how to respond, and that's what makes his presence feel different. Because he is not driven by impulse, he is driven by awareness. And once you develop that habit, you start noticing something important. Control doesn't come from stopping emotions. It comes from creating space before acting on them, and that small shift is what separates reaction from control. He observes his emotions, not fights them. Most people either react to their emotions or try to suppress them. They either let anger take over, or they try to ignore it completely. But both approaches create problems, because reacting leads to loss of control, and suppression leads to internal pressure. But the Sigma male takes a different approach. He doesn't fight his emotions, and he doesn't run from them. He observes them. He allows himself to feel without immediately acting, and that gives him a deeper understanding of what is happening inside him. When he feels something, he doesn't panic or try to push it away. He pays attention to it. He asks himself why he feels this way, what triggered it, and what it actually means. And that awareness gives him control, because once you understand your emotions, they stop controlling you. You stop reacting blindly and you start responding with clarity. And that changes how you deal with pressure, conflict, and even everyday situations. This doesn't mean he doesn't feel strongly. It means he doesn't lose himself in what he feels. He can feel anger without acting on it, feel frustration without letting it control his behavior, and feel pressure without breaking under it. And that balance is what creates emotional strength. Because instead of being pushed by emotions, he is guided by awareness. And over time, this habit builds a level of control that most people never reach, because they either react or suppress. But he understands, and that understanding is what gives him stability. He controls his reactions, not his feelings. Many people think emotional control means not feeling anything, but that's not true. The Sigma male still feels everything. He experiences stress, anger, frustration, and even doubt. But the difference is that he doesn't let those feelings decide his actions. He separates what he feels from what he does. And that separation is what gives him power, because he understands that emotions are temporary, but actions have consequences. Instead of trying to stop himself from feeling, he focuses on controlling how he reacts. He doesn't let a moment of anger turn into a decision he will regret. He doesn't let frustration turn into destructive behavior. And he doesn't let pressure push him into making choices that don't align with his goals. He stays aware of what he feels, but he chooses his actions based on logic and intention. And that creates consistency in how he moves. Over time, this mindset builds discipline, because he learns that feeling something doesn't mean he has to act on it. He learns that control is not about removing emotions, but about managing them. And that allows him to stay stable in situations that would shake most people, because while others are reacting emotionally, he is acting intentionally. And that difference becomes visible in his decisions, his behavior, and his overall presence. Because he is not controlled by what he feels, he is in control of how he responds, and that is what makes his emotional strength real. He stays calm under pressure. Most people lose control when things get intense. When pressure rises, their emotions take over, their thinking becomes rushed, and their actions become reactive instead of controlled. But the Sigma male handles pressure differently. He doesn't let the situation decide his state. He keeps his calm, even when everything around him is unstable. And that calm is not weakness, it's control. Because staying calm in difficult moments allows him to think clearly while others are overwhelmed. When something stressful happens, he doesn't panic. He slows down internally. He focuses on what matters. And he keeps his mind steady. And that gives him an advantage. Because while others are reacting emotionally, he is analyzing the situation and choosing the best response. And that creates better decisions, better actions, and better outcomes. And over time, this ability becomes part of who he is, because he trains himself to remain stable even in chaos. This doesn't mean he doesn't feel pressure. It means he doesn't let it control him. He feels it, understands it, and still chooses how to move. And that creates a level of resilience that most people never build, because they rely on easy situations to stay calm. But he learns to stay calm even in difficult ones. And that's what makes his mindset strong. Because control is not tested when things are easy, it's tested when things are not. He doesn't give his energy to everything. Most people react to everything around them. Every comment, every situation, every small issue becomes something they engage with. And over time, that drains their energy and affects their focus. But the Sigma male understands that not everything deserves his attention, not everything deserves his reaction, and not everything deserves his energy. So he becomes selective. He doesn't respond to every situation. He doesn't engage in unnecessary conflict. And he doesn't allow small things to affect his state. Instead, he chooses what is worth his time and what is not. And that choice protects his energy, because when you stop reacting to everything, you have more control over where your focus goes, and that changes how you move. This mindset allows him to stay focused on what actually matters, because he is not distracted by things that don't add value. He is not pulled into situations that drain him, and he is not affected by opinions that don't matter, and that creates clarity in his actions, because his energy is directed, not scattered. Over time, this becomes a habit. He naturally ignores what is not important, and he naturally focuses on what is. And that creates a different level of control, because instead of reacting to the world, he chooses how much of it he allows to affect him. And that's what makes his emotional control strong, because he is not just managing his reactions, he is managing where his energy goes. He doesn't let emotions control his decisions. Most people make decisions based on how they feel in the moment. If they feel angry, they act fast. If they feel excited, they rush in. If they feel pressure, they choose quickly just to escape the discomfort. And later they realize that those decisions were not the best, because they were driven by emotion, not by clarity. But the Sigma male understands that emotions change, while decisions stay, so he separates the two. When he feels something intense, he doesn't ignore it, but he also doesn't let it decide for him. He takes a step back, gives himself time, and waits until his mind is clear before making a move. And that small delay protects him from mistakes that most people fall into. Because he is not acting from a temporary feeling, he is acting from a stable mindset. This creates consistency in his life, because his decisions are not based on mood, they are based on logic, awareness, and long-term thinking, and that makes his path more controlled. Because he is not changing direction every time his emotions change, he stays aligned with what actually matters, not with what he feels in a single moment. Over time, this becomes one of his strongest advantages, because while others are reacting emotionally and dealing with the consequences later, he is thinking first and acting with intention, and that reduces mistakes, reduces regret, and creates better outcomes in the long run. And that's what makes the difference, because controlling emotions is not just about staying calm. It's about making decisions that are not controlled by temporary feelings. It's about understanding that what you feel now will pass, but what you choose can stay. And once you master that, you stop letting emotions decide your path, and you start deciding it yourself. He turns emotions into awareness, not reactions. Most people experience emotions and immediately turn them into actions. They feel anger and react. They feel frustration and complain. They feel pressure and rush decisions. And because of that, they stay stuck in a cycle where emotions control their behavior. But the Sigma male uses emotions differently. He treats them as information, not instructions, and that changes everything about how he responds to situations. When he feels something, he doesn't immediately act on it. He pays attention to it. He asks himself what this feeling is telling him, why it appeared, and what it reveals about the situation or about himself. And that awareness gives him control, because instead of being pushed by emotions, he learns from them. And that allows him to move with clarity instead of impulse. For example, if he feels anger, he doesn't see it as something to release immediately. He sees it as a signal. Maybe something crossed a boundary, maybe something doesn't align. And instead of reacting blindly, he understands it first, and then decides what to do, and that makes his response more controlled and more effective. This mindset allows him to grow, because every emotion becomes feedback, something to learn from, something to understand. And over time, he builds a deeper awareness of himself and the world around him. And that awareness strengthens his control, because he is no longer reacting without thinking, he is responding with understanding. And that's the difference most people don't realize. Emotions are not the problem. The way you use them is. And when you learn to turn them into awareness instead of reactions, you stop being controlled by them and start using them as a tool. And that's what gives the Sigma male his calm, because he is not suppressing emotions, he is understanding them, and that understanding becomes his power. He practices emotional discipline daily. Most people think emotional control is something you use only in big situations, but the Sigma male understands that it's built in small moments. Every reaction, every choice, every time he decides not to respond immediately, he is training himself, and over time that consistency turns into discipline. In everyday situations, he pays attention to how he reacts. If something annoys him, he notices it. If something triggers him, he becomes aware of it. And instead of reacting automatically, he slows down and chooses a better response. And that repetition builds control, because discipline is not created in one moment, it's created through many small decisions. He doesn't wait for pressure to learn control. He practices it before pressure comes. So when difficult situations appear, his reaction is already trained, his mind is already used to staying calm, and his behavior is already controlled, and that's why he doesn't break easily, because he has built that stability over time. This also creates consistency in his mindset, because he is not controlled by sudden emotions. He has a system, a way of thinking, and a habit of responding that stays the same in different situations. And that makes him reliable, both for himself and in how he handles life. Over time, this discipline becomes natural. He doesn't need to force himself. It becomes part of how he moves, part of how he thinks, and part of how he reacts. And that's what makes his emotional control strong, because it's not temporary. It's built, practiced, and repeated. And that's the key most people miss. Emotional control is not something you turn on when needed. It's something you build every day. And once it becomes part of you, you stop reacting like everyone else, and you start moving with a level of control that stays with you in every situation. So now you see the difference. Emotional control is not about being cold, not about feeling nothing, and not about pretending everything is fine. It's about understanding what you feel without letting it control you. It's about creating space between emotion and action, and choosing how you respond instead of reacting automatically. And that's what separates someone who is controlled by life from someone who is in control of himself. The truth is, most people never reach this level because it requires discipline, awareness, and consistency. It requires you to face your emotions instead of escaping them, to understand them instead of ignoring them, and to control your actions even when it's difficult. And that's not easy, but that's exactly why it's powerful. Once you build this mindset, everything changes. You stop reacting to every situation. You stop giving your energy away, and you start moving with intention. And that's when people begin to notice you. Not because you're loud, but because you're stable. And that stability becomes your strength. If this made you think differently, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more content on psychology, mindset, and human behavior that most people never understand. Because once you learn how to control yourself, you become hard to control by anything else. And now ask yourself honestly, when something happens, do you react first, or do you choose how to respond?